Alright. So first thing I decided to make Christmas lights, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to make, but I knew I wanted Christmas lights, so I decided to get those done first. And I literally had a string of Christmas lights sitting in my lap while I was making these. Unfortunately, they didn't work, but I could at least see what they looked like. I looked back and forth at the reference image and the physical Christmas lights, so I could see what they looked like in real life. And it worked pretty well. I really like the results I got. Right here, I tried to add a little number because look at real Christmas lights, they actually have that. But then I realized that you wouldn't even be able to see it in the final image anyway. I added actual filaments because I wanted it to look as realistic as possible. Now the part that actually glows, I probably should have made a little thicker, quite a bit thicker. If you look at reference photos, you can see that the light is bigger than the actual filament. Here I was playing around with some materials, trying to make a plasticky look. Played around with the noise, using displacement to make it look a little bit uneven surface. This is all playing around with the filament to see how bright I needed it to be. Playing around with test renders. As you can see, there's a lot of noise, which is because the filament is so small. Very small light sources make a lot of noise. Right here I tried to make the wire. I'd never really done it before. I just tried to add a curve, and that doesn't work. So then I discovered the screw modifier. You can actually make very quickly a result like this. It's like a, not braided, but it's like a twisted wire. It looks pretty good. I mean, in real life it's not quite so perfect, but I didn't have time to mess around with those kind of things. Basically, I was putting that off till the end, and when it came down to the end, I was right down to the wire. Right here, I set the scale of the wire to be correct. Then I discovered that the base wasn't thick enough, so I fixed that and forgot to fix the wire. So as you can see, the wire is much too thick. You're not going to fit two wires in there. So I tried scaling it down a bit, and it started looking wonky, so I had to just I just redid it again. And I think I have to redo it again later, but I made the wires like 5 times. Right here, I just added a curve modifier, but as you know, you don't just want the light bulbs following a curve because they'll get warped. You want them to be spawned along the curve rather than actually being modified, warped by the curve. And that took me quite a bit of time to figure out how to pull off. So right here I added a small sphere to actually emit the light instead of the filament. It really does help with the noise. At least the fireflies, that is. There's hardly any fireflies. And I played around with colored lights, which was a waste of time because I didn't even use colored lights in the final result. I might have wanted to, but I didn't have time, and I don't know. I kind of like the white lights, actually, because they're less distracting, I think. I don't know. This was a total waste of time. I was trying to use a particle system to emit colored lights, or I was trying to emit the lights. Now the light is split up into like different objects. There's the base and the actual bulb and the filament. So instead of just joining them, I decided to group them into different groups and try to emit them in a particle system. However, you can, well, maybe you can, but I couldn't find out how to have multiple groups to pick from. And you can't put groups in groups, as I found out. I went so far as to put them in a different file and append them in. It's just a waste of time, really. So here is the third attempt to make the wires, or Is that third? I've lost count. I added just one wire and then used an array to copy it around and then slightly rotated it a bit so that it would look perfect. Also, instead of having the lights go straight up and down, I had them rotated a bit, which I think looks a lot better. Now it's just a task of copying that curve and flipping it around and making it fit. Lots of little annoying, tedious work. Now, the bases for the lights were actual objects. I wasn't spawning them. I wanted to spawn them so that, I could just make a curve and it would automatically follow it. With particle system, I have no idea why, but I suppose I might have used a hair emission system and it might have worked, but then again, I think it would be emitting all over the faces, like it wouldn't necessarily line up correctly. So yeah, I tried using vertex groups so that I could have a normal to control the direction that they pointed, and that kind of worked. That is, except for the lights that are pointing down. They would point up. I have no idea why. I tried just doing two separate particle systems and two separate spawn objects. That's just stupid. And here's a quickie test render. Oh yes, this is sculpting. Me trying to sculpt after not sculpting for like 2 years. At this point I had decided I wanted to make a nativity scene with glass figurines. And I had never done this before, obviously. And yes, this was my first lame attempt at making the baby Jesus. It looks like some sort of Easter egg. I don't know. It looked horrible. I just deleted it. And apparently I had accidentally changed one setting, and that completely messed up the sculpting, so that I couldn't actually sculpt. And I wasn't aware of this, so I'm like sculpting and nothing's happening, and I had to open up another Blender file, and I realized, okay, sculpting works here, why is it not working there? I literally just loaded up the startup file and looked side by side at all the settings until I found, oh, this is the problem. And yeah, this was me trying to make Joseph without any reference whatsoever. I mean, it looks like a person, I suppose, but it doesn't look the way that I wanted it to. So this eventually got deleted as well. Then I got some paper and pencil and sketched out what I wanted Joseph to look like. Oh yes, back to Christmas lights. Finally discovered duplifaces. And I'm like, oh yes, this is what I wanted. This is what I was trying to do. Yes, duplifaces works great. So yes, this is my sketch of Joseph. Just did a real quickie sketch. I'm not very good at drawing. I just decided to block him out. I didn't want actual facial features or anything. I wanted to be very simple because I needed to spend time on the rest of the scene. It's starting to look like Suzanne right there. Yes, I don't know what I was doing. I just deleted that. Throughout this, I pretty much just used the grab brush, the smooth brush, and the sculpt brush. I think I used clay strips a bit too. But yeah, very, very minimal. And I did not want it to be very detailed because I wanted it to be very simple and smooth. Not so much like a physical sculpt. I like the way that this headpiece turned out. I think it looks like Joseph, along with the beard and everything. Flattened out the bottom and touched up the face area. I used the crease brush to bring out those edges and everything. So I added this armature, just trying to see if I could deform it, and I realized that was a waste of time. I had to finish the actual mesh first. I didn't want it to look like a crappy clay sculpture. So here I am using snapping, surface snapping, to retopologize it, which if you've ever done before, it's very, well, I mean, it's alright, but it's very time consuming. But that's what I had to do, so got it done. Here I just plotted out basically the forms that I wanted to flow. I tried to get the topology down as good as I could. I had to kind of cheat in a couple spots, which is perfectly fine. I mean, you can't really tell that much. The top of the head I just kind of filled in with faces. No real plan as to the flow. I guess it kind of works. I got a ring going around and over, so I guess that works. At this point, I decided that I did not like the arms or the hands, and so I would skip that part and then just model it by hand afterwards. This is all pretty just mundane modeling, retopologizing. I didn't like the way the face was, so I tried fixing it, and I didn't like that, so I tried many different faces. This area was difficult. The area between the headpiece and his head, there's like a slight cavity there, and I had to actually think about, what would it look like if it was an actual figurine. If this was a glass figurine, they have to make it this way, and so then it would have to look like this. Whatever, I hope you know what I mean. And since this is going to be using a subdivision surface, I needed the topology to look right so that it would look smooth, and you'd see the edges smoothed out, and the sharper edges, I needed those to not make other areas of the mesh look sharp. Right here I had to try to wrap the edge around so that it came back, so that when I would make that sharp, it would make another area sharp that was actually supposed to be sharp. And here I'm doing a very, very simple test render. It was mostly just to see what the shape looked like, not so much the material. Right here, I tried to give the hands a bit more shape. I made them bigger, as you can see. I made them a bit more flat on the bottom, so they're not just round. I also added a couple loop cuts so that I can set up the rig, as you can see. So there's actually like an actual wrist and a hand and a finger. But yes, so it was a very simple mesh, so it was very easy to set up the armature and very easy to pose. The weight painting, I kind of slacked on. I had to do it quickly and get the rest of the project done, because at this point, I'm not sure when the competition was announced, but I didn't know about it until there was only 15 days left, and this is about where I was after a week. So yeah, I've made Christmas lights, and I'm still making Joseph, and that's all. So I really had to get moving. I had the hand set up so that you could just so he could grab his staff, and it would look kind of like he was actually grabbing it. Just me playing around with Joseph. Haha. Right there I gave him a bit more volume on the bottom half of him, because if it was an actual figurine, I felt like it would have tipped over. And here I'm setting up the colors. Different areas of Joseph are different colors, and then I was realizing that with the subsurf, that would cause wrong areas to be colored, and I had to actually go in and add some extra edge loops to make sure that the correct parts were colored the correct colors. And here's Mary. I sketched her out as well. I wanted a very similar style as Joseph. And even though I probably could have just modeled her by hand in the same amount of time, I decided to sculpt it out first and then retopologize the exact same way so that it would have a very similar look when it was done. And yeah, I had seen someone use matcap in a tutorial and I thought, oh, I'll try that out. And it's interesting. It helps you see shapes a little better. It took me a little feeling around before I decided, okay, yeah, this red color is probably the best. Some of the other ones are kind of distracting. As you can see, I didn't make her arms because I was going to do the same thing as Joseph, just model the arms by hand. This was like the second time around. The first time when I was doing Joseph, I had never done anything like that before. This time I had a better idea of what I was doing, and I was able to do it quicker. And so yay, now I'm done with the sculpting and I'm going ahead and retopologizing it. Spent a lot less time on the face this time. Everything I make, I always try to have the topology, well, perfect. Obviously, you can't usually make it perfect. It's very difficult, but I was happier with the topology on Mary than the topology on Joseph. This part was interesting because there's a lot of edge loops that I needed to connect, and I didn't want it to be very dense, so I had to find ways to connect. Okay, this needs to go connect to here to try to cut back on the poly count. This part I saved for last because I was dreading it. Connecting the arm to the face with that headpiece in between and somehow connect it. As with Joseph, I used some triangles right there, but it was mostly to kill edge loops so that when I would add bevels, or I'd try to sharpen the edges, it wouldn't mess up the rest of the mesh. So now at this point, Mary was pretty much done. I just had to make her arms. So I made them pretty much the same way as Joseph's. His had a bit more shape to them, actually. I tried to make the hands as similar as possible. I'd forgotten how I'd made them, so I had to go look back and forth to see. Try to make it similar. Here I added a indentation to separate the shirt from her skin of her neck, and I also did that on Joseph, but it was less obvious on Joseph. That was something I'd wanted to fix later, but I forgot to, was to make that a little bit deeper. Because as you can see, I modified it a bit here with Mary and made it a bit more of a drop from her shirt to her neck, and I hadn't done that with Joseph. And as with Joseph, basically it's just a bone for her, most of her body and her thigh and head, and a face bone so that I could try to change where she was looking, and also arms and hands. I like to move the arms to like their extreme points and then try to touch up the weight painting like the elbow area is usually difficult. It didn't actually look quite right, but it's not too obvious in the final result. If you look real close, you can kind of tell like it's folding over onto itself. So here I had sketched out in GIMP the composition of the final image that I'd wanted, actually before I even started making the figurines. And I was using the golden spiral as a compositional guide. I guess I'll get more into that when I'm actually at that point, and you can actually see what I'm talking about. Here I was setting up more or less how I wanted Mary and Joseph to look in the final image. And here, this was my sketch of baby Jesus in the manger. It was obviously a lot easier to make than Mary and Joseph, however, it's a completely different kind of sculpt. It's not like a human with arms. It's more of a big shape that's supposed to look kind of like hay, but it's smooth. And it really doesn't look much like my sketch, but I used it as mostly a guide to get the positioning of everything correct. Here, I had filled in the bottom and started to extrude the legs of the manger out. And I realized that I would need to add more edge loops and topology in order to make it look correct. So the legs are basically, they're separated from the rest of the manger, but you can't even see it. So it doesn't really matter. Here I had looked at reference images of nativity scenes to see what kind of poses they were in, and I decided that I liked Mary kneeling down, folding her hands, and Joseph. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to use his arms and his staff to direct the attention toward the baby Jesus, and I was planning on using some lighting as well to draw the attention to the baby Jesus. And here is the stable that I sketched out very quickly. I mean, it's really simple. And here I'm positioning the stable to try to get it in that spiral shape with the baby Jesus in the middle of the spiral. And here I got a texture from textures.com, I believe. I also used texturelib.com, and I used this texture for the stable, for the wood on the stable, the sticks. And it was not a tileable texture, actually. I opened it with GIMP, and there's an option where you can make it tileable, repeatable, and the colors were a bit brighter on one side of the image from the other, so you can kind of see the seam where it connects. There's kind of a separation between light and dark. And it's not too obvious, but it was, I mean, if you look for it, you can see it in the final image. And I had wanted to work on that, but I just didn't have time. It was too small of a thing. I had more important things to do. For the placement of these logs, I had started out what I had thought up in my head, and then it didn't quite look right, so I actually looked at reference images of real manger scenes to see how they did the roof and things like that. And I saw one image and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I think I'll make it look kind of like that. And so literally I just took several different ideas from different sources and combined them to make mine, which is different. So that worked out pretty well. And I wanted to add these shingle, they're kind of like, and they connect to the top of each log there that makes up the roof. And they're all the same size, which was interesting because I had to place everything by hand, so I had to have the correct separation between every log. But I didn't want it to be perfect, so I had to rotate them slightly and move them slightly. Here I added a shingle and UV unwrapped it, and so that I could just copy it and copy it. And as you can see, the pattern, the wood pattern, is the same on every shingle, so it looks very fake at the moment. Here I just took the top roof and connected two together to make one strange looking piece that I don't even know if you could actually make that in real life, that kind of a shape. And so now I went through every single shingle and moved the UV so that it would have a different texture. Same thing for all the front, the wood grain areas. And now that star right there, that's only for reference. And here I played around with materials for the wood, got it looking pretty good. And all that white and black, that's because I like to use an emission shader with a mixed shader to try to see which areas are being affected by which shaders. And then I know, okay, I need to connect this into the top, this into the bottom, and to get the result that I want, rather than switching back and forth and trying to figure out what's going on. Here I set up, well, I had set up the materials for the figurines so that they were all exactly the same except for the color. And the thing about it is, if you decide, oh, I want to make them shinier, you have to do that to all those materials. So that was a bit difficult. I actually redid them, as you can see. I made them shinier. I went through every single one, changed the roughness value, and I think it was a Fresnel. I changed the Fresnel value. Oh yes, and this was my first attempt at making the tinsel. I was doing this according to a tutorial video I had seen that used actual objects for the tinsel rather than like a hair emission system. And it's more difficult to do it this way, especially because it's not as random. It didn't look good at all. And then I had strange issues where I would scale down the size of the tinsel, and that would cause the tinsel to grow out of the wrong end of the faces. So it'd be growing inwards, and then it would grow through the tinsel thread and out the other end, which I have no idea why that happened. And really, I mean, I shouldn't have cared because you can't see it anyway, but I messed around with it until it looked correct. And so yeah, I ended up using a hair system instead of an emission system. And it's interesting, I made a short cylinder with an array modifier, then I just followed the curve and used that to grow the hair from. And it worked out pretty well. Right here I was playing with children instead of actually raising the number of particles, and it didn't work out. I went ahead and just changed the amount value. And someone on Blender Artist pointed out that the tinsel itself is too smooth, and when I first read that I thought that he meant the hairs, the whatever you call them, the tinsels. But he was talking about the strand. It needed to be a bit more choppy looking, like not just this perfect curve. Which I didn't have time to actually do that for the final render, but it looks alright. I think it looks a little too smooth, a little too perfect. And right here, I scaled down the Christmas lights and tried to apply them to the curve, and that caused, well, it was perfectly fine with the bulbs, but the actual wires got skewed in like one direction, so it looked horrible, and I had to spend half an hour figuring that out. Alright, so here's the Christmas tree. My first attempt at making the Christmas tree. I think I did it from scratch 2 or 3 times. At least 2 times. Which, I knew that this was going to be in the background, out of focus, so it didn't have to look perfect. It just had to be, in the shape of a tree, and it would be good. And then Blender crashed, and I had to remake the tree. And there's usually there's an option where you can save the settings to so that the next time you use the sapling add-on, you just load it back up. But it only works if you're in the administrator account or if you're running it as administrator. And I wasn't, so I got an error and I couldn't actually save it right there. So I just okay, whatever, I'll just go with the way it is. I shouldn't have to redo it. Then I added a particle system for the needles. And the needles are huge. Like, if you look close up, they are very big. That's because they weren't really simulating needles, they were more simulating the branches, the short branches that have needles on them. Since it's out of focus, you can't tell. And I added some ornaments to the tree. Slight random variation in the size. And I had tried, first attempt was to add a particle system for Christmas lights, like the actual Christmas lights, and that looked horrible. So I just added tiny spheres. Since it's in the background, you can hardly see it, it's out of focus. And just to get those lights, to get that nice glow effect. And it worked pretty well. Interesting thing, okay, so now I have this plaid texture, which I actually made by hand in GIMP. Which was, it took some time, probably 2 hours I spent on that. And I added actual hair system to the tablecloth so that there would be little fibers sticking up. Because there's a tablecloth in my living room that I looked, ooh, I want it to look like this, and I look real close up and I'm like, oh yes, fibers, we need fibers. So I added this hair system to simulate the fibers. And here I was texturing the tree trunk, even though you can't see it. Alright, so here I added a lamp that's invisible to the camera, but it lights up the baby Jesus, because I wanted that to be the focal point. I wanted to accentuate that this is what you're supposed to be looking at, not the fire in the background, not the star. Yeah, so now here's the star. As you can see, it's very simple. Just basically, I made a star, added a subsurf, and tried to make some of the corners a bit sharper so that it wouldn't be this rounded star shape. And yeah, it's literally just spheres, those little things, those little lights. I would have liked to make it a bit more realistic, like there would actually be something inside of like glass, for example, like almost like light bulbs. But I didn't have time to do that. I think it would have looked a bit more realistic. Because I think the star looks a little unrealistic. Like you would never see a star, an actual object to look like that. And here, here's the render. I edited all the renders out of this, except for, like, this one. So this is, like, sped up 60 times. And here we go, making the fireplace. First I added the room. I wanted the fireplace to be right there. I wanted the spiral to wrap around the flames. And I also set up the, dividing the top half from the bottom half of the screen according to that golden rectangle. And this big mesh you see with circles on it, that is a bunch of lights. I basically used that to light the scene. It's just a shape, a mesh with a particle system that emits lights. It's basically just supposed to give it those reflections, make it look like there's actually Christmas lights in the room, like behind the camera. And here I added an actual base to the stable. And here it's the cloth simulation, which is probably a bit overkill. I could have just extruded the tablecloth. Because you can't see where it hangs over the edge much, and where you do see it, it's just a flat edge pretty much. Right here, the entire tablecloth was emitting hair, and so I had to. It was slowing the whole thing it was slowing render time way down, just navigation through the scene. So I had to cut back. I had to make it only emit hair from the places you could actually see. And now here's the fireplace. It's just a basic brick texture. As you can see, I made it more reflective on the actual brick than on the mortar. And I added a bit of bump to make it look like actual bricks. Oh, that's what that is. I'm like, why am I adding this cylinder? I was making the logs for the fireplace. Yeah, the logs really don't look very good at all. But, since they're out of focus, and they're covered with fire, you can't tell. And now, I was adding the smoke simulation, which I have never done smoke or fire with cycles. I think I did it way back in the Blender internal. Oh yes, that right back there. I remembered, if you look in particle settings, there's like a start frame and an end frame. And so I went to frame 50 and all of a sudden, wait a minute. There's no lights on the tree. Where's the ornaments? And then I zoom out and I see, oh, they're like way down there. You know, way below everything. Because gravity was pulling them. They're just particles. I mean, they fall. So I had to turn off the physics so that they wouldn't move. Took me a bit of time to figure that out. And here, as you can see, the smoke was going through the fireplace mantle, so I added some wind. I added a plane with a force that blew wind, and to try to simulate like a draft, I suppose. And that worked pretty well. Here I was trying to do a test render, but it was taking so long. I had to cut back on some of the particles. As you can see, I just turned off the tablecloth because that's why it was taking so long. And yeah, now I took the light and added colored lights so that there would be colored lights in the room rather than white lights. Because I kind of liked that look better for lighting the room. And so here, I made the room a bit smaller. It's actually very small, like it would be a tiny room. if you were actually in the room. But it works for the project. And, oh yes, I tried to use, I didn't want there to be just lights everywhere lighting the scene, because that would look kind of bland. I wanted there to be more lights in one area, so it would have a better lighting setup. So I tried using weight painting to control the density of the particles, and that didn't work. I have no idea how I was supposed to do that, but it was not working. And here I had tried to add sparkles like in the star, and I think it was just not bright enough. You couldn't really see them. Ah yes, so in here I'm making the stockings. And I don't know if you noticed, but if you look real closely at the final image, not all the stockings are the same. One of them has a heel, as you can see. It's got a high heel. It was funny, I looked up just on Google Images, you know, stockings, and I saw that one. I'm like, ooh, I should just stick that in there. I needed that. At this point, I realized that the fireplace was not where I wanted it to be. I wanted the fire to be... I wanted the spiral, the golden spiral, to be wrapping around the fire, and it wasn't. I had to move the whole fireplace, the wall, everything, and then rebake the fire. But it was worth it. I think it was worth it. I think the image looks better, the final result. And here I'm playing around with the star material again. They're trying to make it look a bit more interesting, because it really looked bland before. I'm making it look a bit more gold, a bit more yellow. And I added a noise texture to try to make it not just a solid color, make it a bit more varied. And here I added a few lights. It's basically just a simple 3-point lighting system, because I am not a lighting expert. And the lights are very dim, actually. I wish now I had done a better job lighting the manger itself, but I think it looks pretty good the way that it turned out. Here, I decided I didn't like the materials on the figurines, so I completely redid them. It's got kind of a Fresnel going on with the color, so I wanted it to be lighter facing the camera, and then it would get slightly darker around the edges. And the hue changed a tiny bit too around the edges. I think rather than using the Fresnel, I used a layer weight is facing. And here, since I'm rendering the background with the CPU, I had to render the foreground with the GPU, because I would not have been able to finish the render in time. And because of that, I had to add an actual mesh to light up the scene for the GPU render, because, you know, there's no fire. It wasn't lighting up. The fire wasn't lighting up the scene. And at this point, I copied the curve for the tinsel so that I could have a separate curve for the lights, because I needed them to be kind of entangled with the tinsel rather than following the same exact curve. And so I tweaked this quite a bit, and I could twist, Control T to twist the curve to make the lights point in different directions, which I had to do, because otherwise they would have gone through the tablecloth or the stable. And here you can see all the lights that are lighting the scene. It's just a bunch of circles, colored circles. Here I had added a lamp to try to light the stockings better, because they just had a velvet material. Here I decided to make the lights go up and over the top of the stable. My brother pointed out that the they were a little too straight, like a little too perfectly straight. They needed to be a little more bent and kind of crazy, because that's how Christmas lights are. And he was right. I did move them around a bit later. Now I added these spheres. These are not actually lighting up the scene. They're on a separate layer, so that I can use them to make a glow effect in the compositor. As you can see, this kind of a glare, the light glare. And it had been a long time since I'd used the compositor. So I added a glow effect to the lights, and also a glare effect. And right here you can see I changed the material on the stockings, because I didn't like just the plain velvet. It was much too dark. I had to mix it with a diffuse shader. And here I'm tweaking the lights one last time, and making sure they're not going through the roof of this table or anything like that. Oh yes, and I noticed, I think I needed the fireplace to be bigger, and that slightly messed up the UVs of everything, so I had to tweak those, and I had to rearrange the stockings. Actually, I don't think I did that. I think they're still in the same place, which is fine. And I had just for a second decided, what does the tree look like with colored lights, but it looks much better with the white lights. A lot less distracting. I had added the tree in the background mostly to try to take away from the star, so the star wouldn't be as much of a focal point. And right here, I was rendering CPU and GPU at the same time. I rendered the background, as you can see, in the CPU, and the foreground in the GPU. And here I'm in a new Blender file, so I can just use the compositor. Because I saved the renders as OpenEXR files, which you should always do that. I had to do that anyway, because since I'm using the CPU and GPU separately, I had two Blender files open. One with one render, one with the other, so I had to save them and then open them in a new Blender file. So at this point it is 2 in the morning, and the day before the deadline. And I had to work 11 hours that day. So I had to get it done that night, try to get some sleep, and then work 11 hours the next day. So I think I darkened the background a bit, so the foreground would be more, it would kind of jump out of the picture more. And right here I'm doing the final touches on the foreground and roughing up the Christmas lights a little bit. The render for the CPU, the background, took 13 hours. Actually more than 13 hours. At 3,500 samples, and this, okay, yeah, I'm rendering on the GPU now. This is sped way up. It took 7 hours at 35,000 samples, so that just shows you how much faster the CPU is. No, GPU. CPU is much slower. And I don't have a slow CPU either. I guess that fire must take a long time to render. Now here I'm getting very close to the final result. I played around with the compositor for, I think, probably 2 hours. Maybe it wasn't 2 hours, but it was a decent amount of time. All in all, I spent 50 hours on the project. Well, that was only while I was recording. I mean, not including, you know, textures, editing textures in GIMP, and all the research I spent, you know, planning. That it was very a lot of time. And here I added a glare for the fire too, very subtle. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Final result, I was like 6 in the morning. I had a few hours of sleep that night and then worked 11 hours that day. Well, thank you for watching.